And look who's here.
Yeah.
Hey,
Brandis talks,
Welcome to the Queen has arrived.
That's right.
So,
You would not be fitting into the program unless you were here. Those of you, my favorite arrival of Brandies was a couple of years ago. We had ice on the ground then, but you also decided to arrive by scooter. Right?
My chariot.
Your chariot, and we're so happy to have you here.
Okay, so here we are wrapping up our day.
Yep.
It's our Q&A. We'll do it today. We'll do it tomorrow. We got so many questions, and we're not Speed and I are going to get together tomorrow afternoon and address some more that'll be on some Speed and Swaggers in weeks to come. But right now, let's get into some questions. Hey, listen, thank you all of you who have hung with us. Big day tomorrow.
It's a long day for you guys.
But let me jump in. This question came from a manager in Kentucky. Tips on helping a new seller get over the hump. I think we got everybody out there's got that seller there. Oh man, if we could just we just get them over the hump. So thoughts? You'll start us out.
So many, because that is pretty much what I do.
Yeah.
Train new sellers.
You're trying to de-hump people, yeah.
De-hump people, yes. Well, one of the things, it helps if you define the hump, because everybody defines it differently. The number one thing, you're going to have to give them some time. People will hire somebody off the street, and 3 weeks later, they're out in the community. And I remember in my former entity asking, what are your call letters? And they would say 106.9. No, your call letters. And then they'd name the company they worked for, or they'd say Froggy 103. And I'm like, oh, and you had people selling media who didn't know what their call letters were. So I'm like, how do they possibly know how to help these businesses come up with solutions using our tools? So you've got to give them time. You've got to be involved. You've got to let them make the mistakes. But as you work them through each piece and let them learn it, and some of us only learn by doing it wrong and saying, oh, that was not the way I meant that to come out. They'll get there, most of them. Some will take themselves out if it's not right. But
first of all, it comes to mind. I had an individual brand new seller, and they kept referring to their floor mat. The station's floor mat, which, General Motors, Ford, I'm not sure which it was. But the big thing we like to do is, and we do this with P1 Plus, our onboarding program, is this is on day one, week one. We set them down and say, you are going to go through a point where you're going to tell yourself very convincingly, I can't do this. Or more importantly, I'm not sure I want to do this. That day of reckoning. And I always tell them my story of day of reckoning. And I remember it vividly, even though that was like in the last millennium. And I tell them the story to expect it, to know it's going to creep up on them in the middle of the night and to power through it. I had a very wise counsel from a very wise boss who said, you're telling me right now after 2 months, you can't do this. He goes, you're the least qualified person in this entire building to decide whether you can do it or not. You barely know where the restroom and the coffee machine is. Get back out there. You still feel this way in a year. Let's talk. We need to be able to counsel them through, to walk them through, because we know what's going to happen. It happened to all of us. Don't let them go through it alone.
I guess I would share, I would call it 8:30, 10, and 4:30. And here's what I mean by that. I think the thing that causes most sellers to not make it is when we just, we let them go, and there's no communication. We're going to talk culture in just a little bit with the question. But the thing that I found that really works is, and this puts a lot of pressure on you as the manager, puts a lot of responsibility on you, but whether they're in the building with you or not, every day at 4:30, you have to talk to them. They have to talk to you. Every day at 4:30, they have to talk to you. So at 8:30, it's tell me about your day. What's it look like? What are we going to do? What's our plan? At 4:30, it's tell me what your day has been, and tell me about tomorrow. Now, the 10 I've recently added in the last year. The 8:30 communication, 4:30 communication, but we give them some onboarding when they first start, and then we push them out there. Yeah. And honestly, at that point, we don't give them much else. Every day at 10 o'clock, they have to watch one video of the 10-Minute Trainer Network.
And when you say, I just don't have the time, how tough was it to find that person to begin with? Now you got to go out. Everything you just spent in the investment of that individual is now trash. It's done. It's over. You got to start all over again. Tell me that's not worth your time.
I think it's us taking on the responsibility of saying, you know what? Yeah, every day at 8:30, every day at 4:30.
I love it.
But if they're not going to make it, let's make sure you and I've talked about this. Yep. If they're not going to make it, let's make sure it's not because of us.
Yep.
Fair?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. I firmly believe You're a rookie your entire first year, just like you are in the NFL. And it takes a full year to onboard somebody. 'Cause every day they should be running into something they don't know, never did before, or screwed up.
Okay.
Because that's how it works.
So parlay off of this, I know there's managers out there thinking, no, I get that, but that's not the expectation on me for our people.
Yeah.
We're expecting to sell more quicker. And, I had someone the other day tell me, the seller had been there a month and hadn't sold a thing. I don't know if the expectation should be that they should sell anything in the first, certainly not on the first visit.
Yeah, I'm with you. It takes time to get there.
Okay, next question. This came from Kansas, and I like this one. Is live and local a thing of the past?
I hope not. I really do, because frankly, that's what we've got. That's what separates us from the herd. That there's so many ways, there's more opportunities to receive and messages than we've ever had in human history. And we talked about this at length. I mean, it's not the songs that we're playing because they sound exactly the same as Spotify. It's what's going on in between. We're talking about, what's coming up with that big game on Friday night or Saturday, or who's running for local election. As we mentioned earlier today, we all live in a news desert. We can be that oasis. And the only way we can do that is live and local.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, live and local, yes, is in the past and is in the today and is in the future. Because, I mean, look, I travel a lot. I could go to Applebee's in any town. Why? I don't know. But I tell you, when I travel to a new town, I'm
Thank you
looking.
to Applebee's for
It will not be our sponsor next year.
But I look for somewhere local to eat. I'm looking for local.
Yeah.
And if I'm in a town, I go to the local radio stations. I want to know what's going on, what the weather is going to be, anything going on in politics, news, culture, what's interesting about that place, things to see and do. Sure, I can watch the national newscast or something, but I'm also going to tune into live and local. I'd like to know what the weather is tomorrow. That's not going to be with David Muir on ABC.
Yeah. Well, if you're in Kansas City, it's going to be cloudy and foggy and
Yes.
You're going to write all of our travel logs. Another good point. I travel the same as you two do as well. And what I love about smart speakers, the best thing to happen to our industry, really since Marconi, which I'll explain who he is later. I worked with him. But if you stop and think about smart speakers, I've got the ability to wake up in any city in the world, as long as we're willing to play with the time zone a little bit, and listen to my favorite show. And what I'm listening for, again, is not to see who's playing the country favorite of the day, because it sounds the same anywhere. It's to find out what's going on in town. What's the weather going to be? More clouds, yay. But these are the things that we need to remember and that we're in charge of. We have control over this.
If that's important for those of us who travel and are a stranger in town, how much more is that important to the people who live there and are a part of that? So they need what's going on at the animal shelter. Did they adopt out all the dogs? Yay. Are there dogs that need to go? Yay. I mean, if you live in the town, you need to know what's going on. And we're so busy with so much information coming in that knowing what's happening in our neighborhood and in our own town can be the hardest to find. So that is radio's gift.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
All right, I'm going to go to a question. We've got several variations on this, and this specific question in the variation are both from South Dakota. So our friends in South Dakota, here you go. One says, talk to me about culture, positive or negative. It's created by management. So how do we handle it? And then the flip side of that says, our culture sucks.
Well, it's the same.
Been employee.
What do we do? I don't know. It's the same group. We're there.
Yeah, if it's the same group.
But I think culture evolves. And as we talked with Eric, culture doesn't trickle up, it trickles down.
Right.
So how do we do a better job of creating culture in our buildings with our teams?
We're all looking at each other. I mean,
I can go for days on this one.
yeah, I mean, to me, the biggest thing is to talk to one another and to establish. I mean, one of the things we mentioned this morning, I don't remember which session anymore, is that when we're doing onboarding, the first thing we do is we have that new hire do a needs analysis of their boss. I think it's imperative that the boss does a needs analysis of their team and their boss, and that everybody's talking and everybody's starting to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be changed, what is holier than thou and should never be changed. It's a piece of who we are. and really to try to do a hard reset on the culture.
Yes. Well, and can you, I like to start the culture question with like, first, can you define your culture without turning it into some kind of motivational poster on the wall? Because anytime someone tries to define their culture to me, it's like, yeah, I saw that poster. It's pithy. It sounds good. It doesn't mean anything.
Did you say
And
pithy?
Pithy.
Okay,
yes,
I just wanted to check.
yeah, I'm very pithy about all this. But it doesn't actually mean anything. And if you talk to the people who work there, they'll just laugh. They say, yeah, we all have that poster. But it's not really the culture. The culture is what everybody's doing in between. So can you really define the culture? And also, since COVID and the return to the office, there are a lot of people who want to talk about their culture as it was or as they want to believe it was. And they all need to come in the office. And there are people who say they come in the office, have sales meeting, and we'll order pizza. But then after that, everybody goes to their cubicles like they did before, and then they coffee badge and go home. They're cold calling, but they go home. The culture has to change, and pizza's not going to do it, though it's nice. If they're going to come in the office 2 or 3 days a week, there needs to be a reason for them to be there. And I do love that, we try to teach our sellers that you go to a client and you say, the benefit of advertising with us is this, the benefit to you is this, but we don't do it with our own sellers. The benefit of you coming to the
Great point.
office,
Yeah.
we say, is our company culture. And they're like, no, what's the benefit to me? If I came in the office, what did I learn? I mean, did we gather everybody together with their problem creative and everybody work on the creative and come up with answers? Did we solve problems? And then do I go home instead of going back to my cubicle to do what I can't do at the office? But the office nowadays has to be stuff you cannot do at home that you came in and you benefited from. The company didn't benefit, they benefited. Then the company will benefit.
Hey, Derron, you used to tell the story about that beat up old sofa in the back office. I mean, do we still have the sofa?
Yeah, we do. I'm convinced that when I think about culture, I think there's, and I'll get parlay to that story. 2 things I think kill culture everywhere. It's lack of communication and lack of connection. Okay. COVID hurt the communication.
Mhm.
It in many cases killed the connection.
Mm-hmm.
So now we try to hire good people, in some cases younger people, and we bring them into our organizations. And we don't communicate with them properly. They don't feel a connection to anyone else. And then we wonder why our culture's not any good. The thing that COVID kept us from doing, that a lot of what I learned early in my career was sitting on an old couch in the break room. We sat around and we talked shop. Well, now stabs are smaller and everybody's, busy, as Eric mentioned earlier. And so there's not that time, that organic occurrence of we sit around, we talk shop, we get to know each other, we know about their families. None of that's happening anymore. So it's that loss of connection. So you take away the loss of connection, and then we remove, or at least we can agree that we're in the communication business and we're poor communicators. We can't expect to have good culture if we don't communicate better and we don't create that connection amongst our team.
Or worse yet, we saw several of these questions where the manager's saying, how come these new young folks can't be more like us? So they're trying to harken back to a day that they've never lived through.
Yeah.
How can we expect them to be just like us?
And don't want to be.
And nor should we. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't want to live through that.
No,
It's gone.
The
Hey guys,
disconnect-
can you expand a little bit? So somebody said, hey, can you define culture for me? Attitude, worth ethic, what is it? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. But
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I mean, it's a little bit of everything, right? I mean, culture is it's everything. But do you want to define it a little bit more as
it's going to be different for every business. And that's one thing with the problem of trying to capture your culture in a time capsule from 1985 and have it still be here today. I can walk into Walmart and it's always low prices, always 24 hours a day. I can get what I need. That's great. There's people there in the bunny slippers and pajamas for whom it was too hard to put on pants.
You've been to my Walmart.
Everybody's Walmart, right?
Was that you?
I a direct competitor, that French store, Target with the big bullseye.
Yeah.
It's a totally different culture. They have a lot of the same products, but it's got the whole shabby chic. It's a different culture.
Right.
People who went to work for Apple back in the day, it was innovative, it was visionary. If you had a new idea, even if it was completely impossible, ridiculous, they got on fire. People wanted to work there for the culture. Those 3 companies all have different cultures that are true to the company. Now, does your station have that? And if you're hiring new Gen Zers, are the boomers still there making fun of them? calling them useless? Are they making fun of the old, or is everybody contributing to the culture and bringing their best into it and creating a culture that's for that company?
But there we go back to, if we're not communicating, if the leadership's not communicating properly,
Yeah.
and we're not creating connections with our team, then there's no culture.
There is no
Right,
culture.
I would define culture is the it. The culture is the spirit. It's the vibe. When you walk in, what do you feel? What do you see? There's nothing worse than, you talked about the motivational posters. Nothing worse than to have the mission statement on the wall that you never live up to the mission statement. The culture is your mission statement, but by defining the
Brought to
mission
life.
statement, now we've got to live by it.
Yeah.
So I think culture is it's that it. It's that thing that separates successful organizations from those who are always going to struggle.
And I think at the very essence of this whole thing is we have to come together collectively in our stations and say, okay, folks, what do we do for a living? What's our core business? And if we're still answering spots and dots and tag packages, and then we're upset because we're not getting younger generations to want to come on board with us, I can give you an answer of why that's occurring. But if we're talking about helping small businesses in your community to grow, to thrive, to go up against the big giant box stores out there, you want to be a part of a dragon slayer. You want to get after that. I mean, Steve Jobs used to talk about punching a hole in the universe. All he was trying to sell was a phone. But it's how we position it.
But it changed the world.
Brian?
And
No,
Derron,
and I think
one more thing before
hold on,
we go
before
there.
we go
Yeah,
to
I
Brian.
just have to have the last word.
Of course.
A good question, if you're trying to, you can impose a culture, you can grow it and develop it. But if you're management and you're worried about the culture, ask yourself this: how much fun are you to work with? Or work for? Because I tell you this, we're in show business. And yes, the business is important. But if you're no fun, why would any young person come work there?
No,
A
you're right.
third of our lives are spent at work.
Okay.
And
So
if we're no fun,
let's take it a step further.
Okay.
I think we got to look ourselves in the mirror and ask this question. Would I want to work for me? Ask yourself,
Yeah.
would you want to work for you? I mean, maybe you would.
10 hours a day?
Yeah, exactly right. So I think we got to turn it back on ourselves.
Yeah.
Our culture, sometimes we expect the maximum from our folks and we're giving them the minimum of us.
Yep.
And so the culture comes when we set the standard, when we lead by example. It's that spirit, it's that vibe. It's us working hard to create the connection and improve our communication.
Us against the world.
Yeah, lack of communication, lack of connection. It's what's killing our culture everywhere. So Brian?
Yeah.
No,
All right.
I was just going to chime in on that as well. That I think a lot of us like to use the buzzword culture on our hiring or on our job descriptions. Don't put that on your job description if you have a horrible culture, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
They're gonna
a lot of people
find
are like
out.
the culture, right? We're a really cool company. And then they walk in the office and it's not there. You got to build it internally first before you go out there and preach it. And I know that that's going to be a challenge because you got to start somewhere. So you got to find a way to do that with your existing team. So that way, when your new recruits start walking in the door, that they're like, oh, they totally lied to me. That's the worst way to build culture, right? And we see that so often.
Yeah. And
And so we got another question that came in from Kentucky that said, how do we improve our communication? So if we can agree that communication is important for our culture, how do we improve our communication? Well, thanks for joining us.
In some ways, I'd have to ask you, like a good shrink, what in your perception is wrong with your communication?
Right.
Because if nobody's talking, I had a boss years ago, he shall remain nameless, who one time I said, there's a problem with the women management and communication in this company. And he didn't see it. And he said, look, my door is always open. And I said, yes, but how many of your women managers ever walk through it? I see the guys going through, but other than me, how many of the chicks who work here ever walk through that open door? And that really caught him as a shock. And so he started realizing when he went to lunch, take one of the ladies with you, go and play golf, see which of the ladies played golf to make up the foursome. And you needed to invite the women into that open door, because the culture was such that a lot of the women weren't going to tell you something unless you asked. You have to know what's going on. So what do you perceive is wrong with the culture? And then say, am I contributing to the communication problem unknowingly?
Right.
And talk to the
An
people who are
open
not.
door and a
committed.
welcoming door are two different things.
Two different
Right. Well, and going back to what Dr. Terry was talking about was exactly that. This is all emotional intelligence. I mean, it comes down to, are you practicing what you preach? And I don't know if it's a good enough just to say, I want to create the environment that I would like to work in, because that takes care of one of us, right? What you want to do is you want to talk to everybody about, what are we doing that you love? What are you doing that we could do better in? And I also love what Eric said. Don't just come into me and complain. Give me 2 solutions. And one of them has to be no charge. And let's just see what we can come up with.
Let me pivot on a different question that I really like that came from Minnesota. How do I generate revenue on podcasts? Okay, so now we're away from culture and communication and all this, and we're just saying, okay, I'm hearing everybody talk about podcasts. How do I make money on podcasts? I got a thought. You guys want to share?
I'll kick it off
Yeah.
if you want.
You kick it off.
Okay, if you stop and think about a podcast, is for gosh sakes, guys, don't overcomplicate it. And I say that from experience because I was overcomplicating it, right? I have got on my apps in my car, because I drive quite a bit, and I'm driving rurally, and I've got a number of podcasts, and I build them to my own personal taste. Kind of cool, right? So what they're doing on these podcasts, is they're opening with a commercial message. Does this sound familiar, right? They're opening with some sort of commercial message of something that would appeal to an individual that would be interested in their topic. So then they'll come in at the halfway point, maybe it's a half-hour program, and they'll have another commercial. And then they'll follow it up with a third at the end. And then they'll have an overall sponsorship over the entire thing. And does this sound a lot like we already do for a living? What you're doing is you're adding new stations, right? But instead of having a tower out in the front of the building and running 24/7 on the same format, you've got all these different opportunities out there. You could do a local sports show, right? The high school sports roundup that could be going on a weekly basis. You go over and they got a freshman quarterback, right? And dad owns a hardware store. I'm seeing a possibility. So don't overcomplicate it. Sell it exactly the same way as you're selling your other products.
Yeah, we can go back to the old days of radio too. Host-read ads. People are listening to that podcast for a reason. You split the income on the host-read ads. He gets a piece, he's an influencer, and then you get some of it too. There is definitely audio pre-roll, mid-roll, end roll that can be popped in and out. I mean, YouTube does it. We can do it on podcasts. You can get, I love the high school sports roundup. You can get a local sponsor who just sponsors the whole thing and ties it into the sporting goods store. You can get the Dick's Sporting Good in the biggest town near you to sponsor all the local ones. You could also change that with them to be co-branded. Some podcasts on radio are co-branded with a kind of a permanent situation. Like
we're kind of co-brandus.
We're kind of, as you should.
As you should be.
Yes. But so those are 4 ways right there that you can, depending which podcast, what works best, be flexible.
And again, what does it sound like? It sounds like what we do every day of the week right now.
It's audio. It's radio, just being served up in a different venue.
Okay.
On demand.
And we're about up against it. We're about to wrap this up. We got one question that came in. I'll share my idea with you. And this isn't mine.
I love this.
I moderated a roundtable sometime end of last year. And podcasts came up and we were talking about how we're making money. And there's a broadcaster that said, tell you how we're doing it. So they turned one of their studios that they weren't using into their podcast studio. All right. They took one of their stations, instead of having another AC station on it. I don't remember if it was, HD, whatever the station was, but they had a translator that they turned into their podcast station. Okay. Podcast studio, podcast station. They went out and sold it to the nonprofits. The nonprofits come in, they do the podcast. The broadcaster provided the board op. So they're selling to the nonprofits, airing the podcast live, then archiving the podcasts on their platform. So they're generating revenue on their podcast with a nonprofit on the station that prior to that was really not generating any revenue.
That is,
and they called it their podcast studio. So I try it.
Get a sponsor for the studio.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brian, I know we had a question come in as we kind of wrap this afternoon.
Yeah. So great question. So I get it. We're coming up a little bit later in the afternoon here for a lot of folks on the East Coast. So I actually tossed this last question into a poll. So I'd be real curious to see. Again, I know we're kind of butting up again on the evening here, but let's open it up, right? So somebody said, okay, we talked about podcasting. What about digital? I'm having some trouble with my team. So I thought, well, this is perfect, right? So let's hear from you guys. If you had only one of these options, which would help the most in driving digital sales higher for your company? Let me read that again, right? If you had only one of these options, which would help the most in driving digital sales higher for your company? So love folks to scan that and give us your insights.
I'm curious on this one
I am
because I
too.
think it's a really good question, and we thank you for the feedback. And we're on a little bit of delay, so it takes us a little bit for this to load. But what would help you the most in driving digital sales for your company? Training existing reps on your products, okay? On sales techniques in selling digital. All right. Let's see. So, interesting. All right. So now it's toggling a little bit more towards back and forth, back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly it appears it's largely going to be the top two of training existing reps. I was wondering if that one's going to pop up. Adding digital only sales reps. And I have a thought on that as we're talking digital.
I do too. I think we probably all do.
This continues to load. And I'll be honest, I don't know if we're going to be on the same page here. I'm kind of curious. So when we talk, tomorrow we're going to a bunch of digital. We got a lot of digital questions. We got a digital specific session with AdCellerant. But when we talk about digital and how we can improve it, guys, are you of the opinion that we need to hire digital only reps, or are we going to let the broadcast reps also sell the digital? And we'll kind of use this as a precursor for tomorrow and a wrap up for today.
I fall directly in the it depends category.
Okay.
If I've got broadcast reps who are not educating themselves on digital, paranoid to sell digital, just not going to sell digital or leave it like the red-haired stepchild, like I know something about that. Then fine, bring on some digital only reps. However, if that means you're going to have some people selling only digital and some people only selling everything else, and you've got clients who would benefit from having both who are never going to get both, then you have a whole nother problem.
Fair.
Because everybody needs to be on all the assets.
You know what? My experience has been hybrid. That the cool thing is that your traditional sellers, I hate using that term, but I just did. They've got depth of contact. They can pick up the phone and they can get a meeting with virtually everybody. You've got the digital folks that really understand how to put it to use, how to tell the story, how to go to a deeper level. So if you have both of them working together, you've got one person out there that's getting the appointment, and you've got that second specialist that's out there that could go with them. I've seen really great things happen.
Yeah.
Is it more expensive?
Yeah.
Yeah, except for if you don't get the revenue at all, does it matter? You know, I mean,
I'm listening to both of you and I'm agreeing with both of you and actually taking a different position all at the same time.
You're so clever.
Aren't I? I agree with what you said.
But I don't.
I also think the healthiest thing for the client is for us to make recommendations to them that combines the broadcast and the digital into one campaign.
Yep.
When we sell it separately, and there are situations where that needs, if you got a bunch of sellers that won't embrace it, then you got to go hire digital only.
Yep.
But when you hire digital only, now you're almost creating competition for yourself, because now you're creating another line that we're encouraging people to buy versus your core properties before. So I like the recommendation if we're just peddling digital, if we're just out there peddling something else, or if we're just out there hiring digital only reps that are out there now peddling the digital, I don't think it works as well as if we have seasoned reps who can embrace the digital and make recommendations to their clients that says, based on what you told me, here's what I recommend. That's always what's going to work best. But recognizing what both of you said, there are times that we probably just need to go out and hire digital only.
well, and yeah, we better not be just peddling digital. Okay. And the scenario
nobody's
is
out there is doing that.
yeah. But the scenario is this: I can come up with a brilliant marketing concept, but you need somebody to bring it to life and to write the commercial message, produce a commercial message. So I bring in my experts. I bring in the folks that do that, and that's really what I'm kind of suggesting.
So we're getting this. So it's time to wrap.